I want to talk about, with all the news that's gone on out there in the last couple of weeks, are there any cheap options out? Because if you take a look at, the markets, we've seen some shakiness going on in stocks. We've definitely seen commodities. We've even seen cryptocurrencies that moved a lot, especially coming out of last weekend. Are there any cheap optionable stocks or stocks out there that have cheap options? And the answer is yes. And what we do is we take a look at not what's happened in the last couple of days, but we'll look at an entire year of option data on near money options. And we get a temperature read, kind of like when you look at temperatures in your town. You look at the temperature today and you look and see, is that unseasonably high or is that unseasonably low of years and years of data? We do the same thing with applied volatility. And we're looking at unseasonably high optional stocks and unseasonably low optional stocks. And so what we do is we look at cheap IV, implied volatility, cheap premiums. What we look at is, where is it today and where is the high been over the last year and where is the low been over the last year? And if we're close to that low, then it's telling us these are some cheap options. So here are the top 10 cheapest options when we rank them from their highest and lowest implied volatility over the last year. Now notice, each of these are sitting on their low, very, very low implied volatility right now. All right. The top 9 are bank and finance stocks. And that last one, number 10 there, that's a realty stock. So when you look at these top 9, what's the one theme of bank stocks right now? Well, the majority of them have already came out with their Q1 earnings. So what was an unknown has now become a known. The other thing that's interesting about bank and finance is these would be friendly in a Trump presidency. Bank and finance typically are on the Republican ticket. So that might be another reason why they're a little bit lower than normal. But I thought what I'd do is take those top 3, CFG, USB, and BK. I want to show you what they look like on a chart. And then I want to show you what I did to determine which ones really truly do have the cheapest options moving forward 90 days, moving into September, October, November. All right, so take a look at Citizens Financial Group. Citizens Financial Group has been a low 30s to a low 40s stock. All right, when you go back to really the first quarter of the year. The last 2 times these guys did not meet expectations, but their outlook wasn't the worst either, which is why they've moved higher. Kind of moved sideways to higher when you look at it after Q1 earnings. So they came out with their Q2 earnings, and look what's happened. The stock really hasn't budged at all. But the volatility, and these are all options from 7 days to expiration to 149 days to expiration. You can see they dropped from about, I want to call it a 40 down to the low 30s. So we've seen a good 20% drop just since last week in implied volatility on Citizens Financial Group. Let's take a look at U.S. Bancorp. U.S. Bancorp was a stock that was in the mid 40s, dropped down to the high 30s, only to climb back up to the mid 40s. And they went from a miss to a beat this time. Applied volatility went from the low 40s down to the high 30s. But what's interesting is they've gapped up. They've not hit either the low end of that gap or the high end of that gap. I think that's bullish for U.S. Bancorp. But most importantly, you see the options. They've gone from a little more on the expensive side to close to where they are in terms of cheapness for the year. Finally, Bank of New York Mellon. So Bank of New York Mellon has gone from the low 50s to the mid 60s. Now, the reason they've hit the mid 60s is they had a beat in Q1, they had a beat in Q2, they had a gap up after the Q2 earnings. They have pulled back a bit because they did have a bit of a run. But I believe that the day that we had, which was around 61.5 before earnings, makes a good support point. Most importantly, look how cheap the options got. They went from being a high on Q1 of 66. They had their high at just above 60 before the Q2 earnings, dropped down to the low 50s. More importantly, they've dropped down, and they have risen a little bit, but they've dropped down to new IV lows for the year. So when you take all this data, and you take it from not just the top 3 stocks, but all the top 10 stocks, and you run it through. I ran it through looking for which stock has options that have the best chance to double going forward between now and, let's call it, November. Here's what stacks up at the top of the list. BK. All right. What's BK? Is that that's Bank of New York Mellon. That has a, this is based off of Friday's close, but we're seeing those near to out of the money options, that have low implied volatility going all the way out to October, November. The percent to double on those are the lowest, which means we would need a little bit more than a 5% move in the stock in order to see this particular stock double in value. All 10 of them are here. But here's the thing I want to mention to you is that, yes, there are options out there. There are optionable stocks that have cheap options, even with what's happened in the last 2 weeks, because these particular stocks are A, they're behind in earnings. B, they are stocks that are favored to go up in the next few months. And C, they're also interest rate sensitive too. So that's something to take a look at as well.